allow you to introduce yourselves and your teachers, coaches, etc. Then we'll jump into it. I'm Kurt Mavis. I'm an attorney with the United States Air Force, and I'm a We the People alum.
Robert Oster. I'm an attorney from Lincoln, Rhode Island, and a professor at Johnson Wales.
And I'm Dan Sheets. I'm an assistant United States attorney from Nevada. That means I'm a federal prosecutor.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Your Honors. My name is Keith Watson, and I'm here with my teammates Keely Linger and Kenneth Stevenson, and our teacher, Mr. Vader.
All right, Unit 3, we will be doing question 3. So I'll read the question and then allow you to respond. The tendency of a common and easy resort to this great function, judicial review, now lamentably too common, is to dwarf the political capacity of the people and to deaden its sense of moral responsibility. Do you agree or disagree with this assertion? Why or why not? What evidence can you offer in support of your position? How is judicial review established in the United States? And evaluate the arguments that John Marshall used to justify his declaration that it is the province and the duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is.
Speaking 10 years after writing the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, Justice Harry Blackmun stated, "I'd be less than candid if I said the hate mail does not hurt." This is an example of why we disagree. The American people have become politically mobilized because of Supreme Court decisions involving judicial review. Citizens on both sides of the Roe v. Wade case expressed their sentiment on the matter by sending letters to Justice Harry Blackmun every day until his death 3 decades later. People also assembled to show their legislatures and the judicial branch their feelings of abortion being found a constitutional right. Pro-life advocates have held an annual March for Life in an effort to sway the Supreme Court to overturn the ruling, drawing 600,000 advocates this year, a strong showing of the moral responsibility of the American people. Oregon v. Mitchell inspired students to protest for their right to vote for those old enough to fight, which led to the passage of the 26th Amendment, lowering the voting age to 18 in all elections. Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission also mobilized the public. This decision allows corporations to independently spend unlimited amounts of money on campaigns, which sparked the proposal of the Saving American Democracy Amendment to overturn the case.
In their political capacity, Americans can pass constitutional amendments to overturn Supreme Court decisions, which requires either 3/4 of the state legislatures or state conventions to approve. An example is the 14th Amendment overturning the Dred Scott decision by defining citizenship. The people also have the political power to elect the Senate and House of Representatives and elect the president indirectly through the Electoral College, which, with rare exception, votes in accordance with the popular vote. Since the president nominates Supreme Court justices who must be confirmed by the Senate, citizens can influence judicial selection through political engagement. Many criticize judicial review because it is not expressly mentioned in the Constitution, claiming it was merely established through precedent set in Marbury v. Madison in 1803. However, prior to its recognition in Marbury, many states, including New York, expressly mentioned the power of judicial review in their constitutions, and all state courts exercise the power. The first federal exercise of judicial review occurred before Marbury v. Madison in 1796's Hilton v. United States, when the court upheld the tax on carriages established by the Carriage Act.
Prior to Marbury v. Madison, laws had been overturned in the lower courts in cases such as Hayburn's case and the United States v. Rivera. The Supreme Court first provided its reasoning for judicial review in 1803 in Marbury v. Madison. Chief Justice John Marshall, who wrote the final opinion in the case, argued that since the Constitution is the nation's highest law, under the Supremacy Clause in Article 6, laws contrary to the Constitution were not law at all. Due to this, higher law must always prevail over laws created by the legislature. John Marshall said that if there was no judicial review, then, quote, written constitutions are absurd attempts on the part of the people to limit a power in its own nature illimitable. John Marshall reasoned that the Supreme Court is supposed to act under the Constitution, creating a basis for judicial review. In the Marbury v. Madison decision, Marshall also uses Article 3, Section 2, which extends the judicial power to the court and asks if the framers thought, quote, a case arising under the Constitution should be decided without examining the instrument under which it arises. This allows the Supreme Court to establish the judiciary as an equal branch of government and have judicial review. Thank you, Your Honor. Now that I feel follow-up questions.
Thank you. I guess I want to talk about something that you mentioned in your opening, was that the state courts were using judicial review at the time, but that was specifically written in their Constitution, as you noted. It was considered by our founders and specifically chosen to not be included in our Constitution. So how do you balance that, where, you know, of course the courts could do it because it was in their Constitution, and now we're saying the federals can do it even though it's not in the Constitution?
Well, I think it's because, as John Marshall said, it's emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department. So that's basically one of the roles of the court. It would be like saying that they don't have the right in trial courts to hear the facts of the case. That's one of the roles that the court plays in society and the justice system.
And also, judicial review was an important check of limited government, and the founding fathers all appreciated limited government, and that's what their goal was in establishing our government under the Constitution, because they had just come from a tyrannical government that had abused their powers. So in that way, it was also assumed essentially that judicial review would occur in the courts.
So why not write it in?
That was one point that they didn't feel they needed to specify in the Constitution, because the Federalist Papers directly established the reasons for judicial review and why it was important. And the founders came to feel that the Federalist Papers exemplified their reasons, and by giving the judiciary branch in Article 3 all of these different rights, they were then to interpret it as also being given the right to judicial review, even though it wasn't expressly mentioned.
And also, the document is a fairly short document, and it's a living document. So, in essence, the more concise it could be and somewhat the less they could include, the more it could be a living document and adjust to the times of the people. And therefore, in hindsight, the 1803 case Morgan versus Madison is well respected and has become ingrained in our culture.
Right. Some people would argue that Roe versus Wade, which you cited, and some of the other cases are cases of judicial activism gone wild. Others would say they haven't been active enough. What do you think?
I think that this is certainly an abuse of the power of judicial review, because in the Roe v. Wade decision, Harry Blackmun actually sets up the framework. So it sets it up in trimesters. So in the first, the state is not allowed at all to regulate abortion, and in the second, it is if there's a compelling interest, and in the third, they are. So it seems like more of a policy than an interpretation of the Constitution. One example of this is in the Charlotte-Mecklenville case, which dealt with busing to achieve integration, and Justice Black said, where is busing in the Constitution, just to show that this is more policy than interpretation.
I would disagree with this idea, because there are different portions where the Supreme Court has gone to help and promote more rights being given to people, which was done in West Virginia versus Barnett, and multiple religion and school cases like those, and different cases based on free speech, and all of these different values that allow people to actually have the rights that they were meant to have. And without judicial review, those rights wouldn't have necessarily been guaranteed.
Well, are those rights guaranteed by the Constitution, or is the courts finding or creating rights, such as in the contraceptive topics?
In a lot of cases, the rights are being found by the Supreme Court, especially after the 14th Amendment, finding liberty interests in the 14th Amendment, such as contraception, and Roe v. Wade case of abortion, and Griswold in contraception. Also in Griswold and even in Katz v. U.S., the privacy rights have been found. Rights are Katz penumbras, and therefore derived from other amendments.
Now, some would argue that those rights were created by the court, not found in the Constitution. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think that those rights could be seen as being something that the courts have determined should be found in the Constitution and therefore has. But I think that, as mentioned with Griswold versus Connecticut, the First, Third, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments have zones of privacy. And so with those, there are other rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution that should be.
Another example of this, I think, is NAACP versus Alabama, which says that under the First Amendment, there's a right to association. And although they don't explicitly state this in the Constitution, it's easy to see how this could be implied from things like the right to assemble and the right to free speech.
Let me just follow up on that. You started off your presentation with the observation from Supreme Court justices that the hate mail still continues. The people then perhaps are feeling like the court is suppressing their voice, the will of the people. Do you agree or disagree with that? Does the courts thwart the will of the people when they decide social issues?
Well, it's going to depend upon who you ask and the will of the people. Maybe it's just a minority of the people who are sending this hate mail, or maybe it's the majority of the people feel that way. But in other cases, as we cited, the Oregon v. Mitchell and the passing of the 26th Amendment, much of the rights found or discovered, however you'd like to say it, in the Constitution benefit a majority of the people and therefore have the backing of the will of the people instead of the government.
Well, I think that it can dwarf the capacity of the will of the people, but I think that one of the reasons the Constitution was set up was to protect minority rights. I see my time's up. Can I finish answering the question? Many citizens wouldn't want illegal aliens to be able to attend public schools. However, it's a minority right, and this was upheld in Palaio v. Doe.
Great, thank you very much. Do some feedback.
Sure. Well, you certainly know your constitutional law. And beyond just the question that we asked you, was asked of you, namely, what does moderate mean? What is judicial review? You certainly know that. You know well beyond that. You demonstrated that in your opening and in the follow-ups. I think your follow-ups were particularly strong. I learned a lot from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this was significant because we asked a lot of do you agree or disagree, and that's because we were engaged in a conversation, and those are questions that obviously we're not going to answer in this room. But what I liked about it was you provided your thoughts and then backed it up with authority. And that's what I was scribbling down the whole time was, all right, this is what they think, okay, and this is why they think that, and that's what I like. We can all have original ideas. I don't suggest that, but it's nice to have some authority to back that up. And I really appreciated almost every time someone had something to say, and this is why I think that. So, great job. Thank you.
Most of what I can say is I agree with what we heard. You demonstrated in your answers a grasp of the underlying principles of judicial review, not just the historical. Particularly, we threw a few questions about why in these rights. Is the creation or the recognition of these rights a creation of the rights, or simply a recognition of the rights that already existed? So you didn't stop with a yes or no answer, but you talked about the dome of privacy that's created in the amendments in the Bill of Rights. And then you went on to give some specific examples to support that argument. But you weren't supporting every aspect of judicial review. You were telling me there's some problems with it too, which I thought was very helpful to elucidating the topic. So very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good oral.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hard work. Pay off for you. Congratulations.